On Christmas Eve in 1945, the Sodder family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, caught fire during the night. 4 children escaped the burning house, while 5 others were never found afterward. By the time the flames were gone, the family had lost not only a home, but also any reliable account of what had happened to 5 children inside it. By morning, the wooden house had been reduced to ruins, with collapsed floors, blackened beams, and debris where the bedrooms had stood. Yet the family was left with a question the fire could not erase. If the 5 children had died inside, where were their bodies, and why had nothing identifiable been recovered? That question made the Fayetteville fire a mystery. It did not begin with a wild theory or a later rumor. It began with a missing answer inside a destroyed home, with 5 children absent, and with parents who could not accept silence, ashes, and official assumptions as proof of death. Christmas Eve is meant to mark the safety of home, the place where children are expected to pass through the night under their family's care. In Fayetteville in 1945, that promise ended when the Sodder house became the last confirmed location connected to 5 of the family's children. The fire changed the meaning of the home. Before that night, it was a residence filled with parents, children, bedrooms, furniture, and ordinary household routines. Afterward, it became the center of a loss with no clear ending because the building was gone, but the central question remained unresolved. 4 children escaped the fire. 5 children were never found afterward. Those facts created 2 different realities inside one family. Some children survived and could describe what they remembered, while the others disappeared into uncertainty without a confirmed grave, a recovered body, or a final verified sighting. The surviving children could be counted, questioned, and reached in the days after the fire. The missing children could not be placed in graves, returned to their parents, or connected to a final confirmed moment. Their absence turned a family tragedy into a problem of identification and evidence. George and Jenny Sodder were not symbols at first. They were parents forced to live with an unanswered loss in the immediate aftermath of a Christmas Eve fire. Their pain was not only the grief of losing children. It was the absence of a body, a final sight, and a clear account of the last minutes inside the house. Uncertainty can keep a wound open for years. Without remains or a confirmed account of what happened, George and Jenny could not give their grief a definite place to settle. They had no burial, no physical evidence to examine, and no final moment that could separate what was known from what was only assumed. In an ordinary house fire, the building may be destroyed, but the people inside are usually accounted for through what is recovered, witnessed, or documented afterward. The damage can be terrible, and the investigation can be difficult, yet the basic question of who survived is often answered through remains, testimony, or both. At the Sodder home, 5 children were gone, and no bodies were found after the fire. That absence became the first piece of evidence in a mystery that would outlast the flames. The ruins showed that the structure had burned, but they did not provide the physical proof the family expected to find. George and Jenny refused to treat the missing children as dead simply because the house had burned. Their choice was not easy. Hope built on comfort. It was the desperate hope of parents who had no remains to bury, no confirmed deaths to record, and no clear answer to place before themselves. They were not claiming that hope could prove what happened. They were refusing to let an absence become a conclusion without proof. For the Sodders, the missing bodies were not a minor detail within the investigation. They were the central fact that made the official explanation feel incomplete. At first, the event could be described in simple terms: a house fire in Fayetteville on Christmas Eve in 1945. That description accounted for the destroyed structure and the emergency response. Then the missing children and the absent bodies changed the shape of the event, turning a local disaster into an unresolved disappearance. The family's question became larger than how the fire began or how quickly the house was destroyed. It became a question of whether the 5 children had died there at all. If they had, the ruins should have offered some confirmation. If they had not, the fire represented only the beginning of a different investigation. The 4 surviving children could leave the ruins behind, but their survival could not erase the loss of the other 5. Their memories remained tied to the same night, the same house, and the same unanswered sequence of events. Every known face in the family carried the weight of those who were missing. The home had once held a family through ordinary days and Christmas preparations. After the fire, it held only absence, and that absence followed the surviving family long after the flames were gone. The burned foundation became a physical reminder that the structure had vanished, while the questions inside the family remained. What remained was a chain of facts pointing in different directions. A house destroyed by fire, 5 children officially counted among the dead, and no confirmed remains to settle the question. The blaze explained how the building vanished, but it did not explain why the physical evidence was incomplete, why the family challenged the official conclusion, or whether the missing children had been inside when the fire started. No single clue proved that they survived, yet the absence of proof that they died left the case suspended between tragedy and disappearance. In Fayetteville, the flames ended within hours, but the mystery endured because the most important evidence was missing from the ruins. The known facts are narrow but firm. In the early hours of Christmas morning in 1945, a fire destroyed the Sodder home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. 4 children escaped the burning house, while 5 others vanished. When the ruins were examined, no bodies were found, leaving the family with a disaster that had a confirmed fire but no confirmed explanation for the missing children. Everything beyond those facts belongs to the mystery, not to proven history. George and Jenny Sodder came to believe that the 5 children had been kidnapped rather than killed in the fire. That belief explains the choices they made afterward, including their refusal to accept an unverified conclusion. It does not by itself provide physical proof that a kidnapping occurred. For the parents, the deepest pain was the absence of a final goodbye. There was no last conversation to preserve, no clear farewell before the fire, and no grave where they could visit the children. Their grief had no definite endpoint. Instead of a confirmed death, they faced an unanswered disappearance, a form of loss that offered neither certainty nor a place for mourning to settle. Even people who have never faced such a loss can understand a smaller version of that pain. It is the feeling of waiting for someone who should have arrived, while each passing hour makes the silence harder to explain. For George and Jenny, that waiting did not end after one night, 1 week, or 1 season. It continued through years in which no reliable answer replaced the uncertainty. The fire destroyed the house, but it did not give the parents the physical answer they expected. In many fire cases, the people inside are accounted for through remains, witnesses, or a clear record showing how they escaped. Here, 4 children survived, the house was destroyed, and 5 children were missing from the result. That gap became the central fact the family could not resolve. Because the children were not found, George and Jenny looked beyond the burned structure for an explanation. The missing bodies did not prove that a kidnapping had occurred, and the absence of remains could not identify who might have taken the children. It did, however, leave the family without the evidence needed to accept death as certain. The unanswered question remained open because the expected physical evidence was absent. George could not close the case inside himself. As a father, he was left with a question that followed him into every ordinary day. What had happened to the 5 children after the fire began? Family life could continue on the surface, with work, meals, and responsibilities demanding attention. Yet the missing children remained present through their absence, turning routine moments into reminders that the family was incomplete. Each year without an answer changed the meaning of normal life. Birthdays arrived without the 5 children who should have been growing older. Meals and quiet evenings could still happen, but none of them erased the empty places left by the disappearance. The passage of time did not resolve the loss or confirm the deaths. Instead, every anniversary made the lack of an answer older, more permanent, and harder to explain. Jenny carried the same burden beside him. This was not only George's search, and it was not only his belief that the children might have been taken. Both parents lived with the same painful split between public loss and private hope. They had to function as a family while carrying an uncertainty that could not be settled by ordinary mourning, official conclusions, or the simple passage of time. The burned house could be left behind as a physical place, but the question could not. Wherever the family lived and whatever daily responsibilities followed, the fate of the 5 children remained tied to the night of the 1945 fire. The home had been destroyed in a matter of hours, yet the uncertainty traveled with the survivors. The structure disappeared, but the unanswered disappearance remained part of the family's life. Other people could look at the ruins and ask the parents to accept a simple ending. For George and Jenny, there was no simple ending to accept. Certainty had not been recovered through bodies, a verified sighting, or a documented account of the children's fate. Comfort could not be built from an answer that did not exist. The family was expected to grieve, but the central question of what happened remained unresolved. That left them alone with a belief that some people might call impossible. They had to protect hope while knowing that hope could also prolong their pain. If the children were dead, hope delayed acceptance. If they were alive, surrendering hope could mean abandoning them too soon. Every demand to move on carried a hidden demand to stop asking what had happened during and after the fire. Over time, the parents came to believe that the 5 children had been kidnapped. The distinction matters. They did not claim that the fire itself proved a kidnapping, nor did the ruins identify a perpetrator. They believed the children had been taken because the fire did not explain where they were. Their conclusion grew from the gap between the destruction of the house and the complete absence of remains. The disappearance created the belief. The belief did not create physical evidence. Keeping those 2 points separate is essential because the historical record can show what the parents feared, suspected, and publicly argued without proving that their explanation was correct. A family's conviction may reveal the strength of an unanswered question, but conviction alone cannot establish the sequence of events or identify what happened to the missing children. Hope then changed from a feeling into a duty. If the 5 children might still be alive somewhere beyond Fayetteville, George and Jenny could not simply mourn them and walk away. Each day became a test of whether giving up would mean abandoning them too soon. Continuing to search offered no guarantee of success, but stopping carried a consequence the parents could not accept: the possibility of ending the search while their children were still living. That hope was both loving and painful. It gave the parents a reason to continue, but it also kept the wound open through every year without a verified sighting or dependable lead. Love kept the children present in the family's mind, even when the available evidence offered no reliable answer. Hope preserved the possibility of reunion, while the continued silence made that possibility increasingly difficult to sustain. Eventually, George and Jenny moved their private pain into public view. They used a billboard carrying photographs of the missing children, turning their absence into a message that strangers could not easily overlook. The display transformed a family question into a public appeal, connecting the vanished children to anyone who might have remembered seeing them after the fire or recognized them years later. The purpose was direct. If someone had seen the children, recognized them, or knew where they had gone, that person might come forward with information. The billboard could carry the question far beyond the burned home and reach people who had never heard the family's story. But publicity could not prove what happened, identify a kidnapper, or restore certainty. It could only keep the search visible while the family waited for an answer. The billboard did more than announce 5 missing children. It placed their faces before strangers along the road, refusing to let them disappear into the nameless past of the December 25, 1945 fire. The photographs transformed a private search into a public appeal, where motorists, neighbors, and travelers could encounter the children's names long after the burned Sodder home had been cleared. For George and Jenny Sodder, each photograph carried a life that had been interrupted, not erased. The pictures showed children as they had been before the fire, surrounded by ordinary family time rather than flames, rubble, and unanswered questions. The sadness was difficult to escape. The parents were asking the public to remember children whom they could not bring home or prove dead. A photograph changed the mystery by giving absence a face. Instead of searching for 5 unknown children, people could look for familiar features, familiar expressions, and recognizable ages. The images offered details that a written notice could not provide, including the children's appearances as remembered by their family. A passerby might connect one face with a child seen at a station, roadside store, or distant town. The billboard also carried the family's story beyond Fayetteville and beyond the immediate circle of people who knew the Sodders. A person who had not been near the house that night could still recognize one of the children and offer information. But a photograph could invite memory. It could not prove what had happened. Recognition might produce a lead, yet a lead still required dates, witnesses, records, and evidence that could survive scrutiny. The town now encountered the family's grief in public. Anyone passing the sign would see 5 young faces connected to a fire that had already become part of local memory. The display turned an event associated with one home and one family into a continuing presence along a public route. Each sighting of the photographs renewed the question of whether the children had died inside the house or left it alive. The story no longer belonged only to the Sodder home. It had entered the community, where private pain could be noticed by many people, even though no public reaction could give the family a confirmed answer. Residents could discuss the fire, remember the night, or consider the family's suspicions, but conversation could not replace physical remains, verified sightings, or an official finding establishing the children's fate. Years passed without a proven account of what happened to the children. According to the case history, George and Jenny continued searching for the rest of their lives, maintaining the possibility that the 5 had been taken rather than killed. Their efforts outlasted the original investigation, the first wave of publicity, and the period when a fresh witness might still have remembered crucial details clearly. The pattern never changed. The children remained missing, the fire remained the last known event connected to them, and the unanswered question continued to follow the family through time. No confirmed recovery changed the record. No authenticated document established a destination. No verified witness account closed the gap between the Sodder family's suspicions and the conclusion that the children had perished inside the burning house. Ordinary time became painful time. Birthdays, family memories, and the passing of another year could all remind the Sodders that 5 places in their lives remained unresolved. A calendar normally marks distance from an event, but for the family, each anniversary also measured the length of the uncertainty. The children were absent, yet the circumstances of that absence remained tied to one night in 1945. For most families, time can soften the sharpest loss by creating a settled memory and a known date of death. For the Sodders, uncertainty prevented that process from beginning. They could grieve the children, hope for them, and fear for them at the same time. The family had to preserve memories without a confirmed ending, while every new rumor threatened either to revive hope or deepen the pain. The mystery turned on 2 competing explanations. One held that the 5 children died in the 1945 fire, even though their bodies were never found. That explanation treated the blaze as a fatal house fire and the missing remains as a consequence of destruction, confusion, or incomplete recovery. It fit the known catastrophe, but it left a central physical question unanswered. Where were the remains? The other was the belief held by George and Jenny that the children had been kidnapped rather than killed. The lasting mystery came from the gap between these explanations and the absence of proof that could settle it. Their belief drew strength from circumstances they considered suspicious, but suspicion did not identify a kidnapper, establish a route away from Fayetteville, or document where the children had gone. Neither possibility offered peace. If the children had died, the missing remains denied their parents a clear goodbye. There was no confirmed burial place to visit, no recovered personal effects that conclusively identified a death, and no complete physical account that could turn the fire into a settled tragedy. The family was left with a devastating conclusion that could not be demonstrated in the ordinary way. If the children had been kidnapped, the family faced an even more painful thought, that they might still be somewhere, waiting to be found. One explanation brought grief without final evidence. The other brought hope mixed with fear. Every possible sighting could suggest survival, but every unverified report could also be a mistake, a rumor, or a cruel false lead that prolonged the family's uncertainty. The fire itself was the known event. It destroyed the Sodder home during the early morning hours of December 25, 1945, and separated the family from the 5 children who were believed to be inside. The disappearance of 5 children was the known result. Between those 2 facts stood the unanswered sequence of events, whether the children died in the structure, escaped it, or were removed before the flames consumed the evidence. The kidnapping theory was an interpretation built from the missing bodies and the parents' doubts about the official account. Keeping those parts separate matters, because a belief can explain why a family kept searching without becoming physical proof. The family's questions were evidence of their doubt, not independent confirmation of abduction. A careful account must distinguish documented conditions from conclusions drawn afterward. What remained at home was not simply silence, it was the empty space left by 5 missing children, carried through family memories that could never be completed. Their rooms, belongings, photographs, and remembered routines became fragments of lives interrupted without a verified final moment. The surviving family members had to preserve those fragments while the public record continued to offer only a fire, a disappearance, and competing explanations. Their lives were reduced in the public record to unanswered names and photographs. That absence became heavier than a confirmed ending because it offered neither certainty nor release. A confirmed death would have brought unbearable grief, but also a factual boundary. The missing children had no such boundary. Their images remained visible, their names remained attached to the billboard, and the question of what happened continued without a conclusion. A careful investigation would begin with the fire on Christmas Eve, 1945, at the Sodder home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. What did the flames destroy, and what could they not destroy? The collapsed structure could show where the fire burned and where the house failed, but it could not, by itself, explain what happened to every child believed to be inside. The next question concerned the missing bodies. Could an intense house fire have consumed all physical evidence, including bones and teeth? Were remains overlooked in the debris, removed before investigators arrived, or never present in the first place? Investigators had to separate physical evidence from fear, hope, rumor, and memories formed during a chaotic Christmas night emergency. For George and Jenny Sodder, suspicion was not a puzzle game or a newspaper story. It was an act of love by parents who could not find the bodies of 5 children after the ruins cooled. Their home had burned, but the expected physical proof of 5 deaths was absent, leaving them unable to accept that the final answer was buried beneath the house. Their belief that the children had been taken did not come from a simple desire for attention. It came from the cruel space between death and proof. If the children were gone, the family needed the truth, including evidence strong enough to withstand investigation. If they were alive, accepting the fire as the ending could mean abandoning them while there was still a chance to search. That unresolved space kept the case alive. The fire destroyed the Sodder home. 5 children vanished from the family's account of that night. No bodies were found, and George and Jenny continued searching in public. Each fact preserved the next question. The burned ruins raised one set of doubts, while the absence of remains kept those doubts from settling into certainty. A confirmed death might have closed the story, even through unbearable grief. A body, identifiable remains, or a documented chain of evidence could have established what happened after the fire began. But without remains, the family had no clear ending, and investigators had no final physical conclusion. The mystery survived because the evidence stopped before certainty could begin. The Sodder family was left between 2 emotional worlds. Grief said the children were gone because the house had burned and the family had lost its home during the holiday. Hope said they might still be alive because no confirmed remains had been recovered. George and Jenny had to carry both beliefs at once, with neither one fully supported or fully erased. That meant mourning without a final goodbye while still watching for news that could change everything. Their home had become a place of loss, marked by charred timbers and family absence, but the missing children remained present in every unanswered question. A funeral could honor a confirmed death. Without remains, even that painful act rested on uncertainty. A mystery can grow without a new discovery. Every year without bodies, a confirmed sighting, or a reliable account of the children's whereabouts left the original questions in place. Silence did not prove kidnapping, and an unverified report did not prove survival. Yet silence also did not erase the parents' doubts, especially when the central physical evidence they expected was missing. The passing years added no firm answer. Instead, they made the old uncertainty harder to escape. Memories of the Christmas Eve fire became more distant, while the newspaper coverage, public appeals, and missing children images kept the case visible. It remained suspended between what could be shown through records or remains, and what could only be feared, remembered, or hoped. The 4 children who escaped the fire were also part of this human cost. Their survival stood beside the loss of 5 siblings, creating a family history marked by both rescue and disappearance. The contrast was permanent. Some family members could describe surviving the night, while the whereabouts and fate of the others remained unresolved after the house burned. No careful account can invent what those surviving children later felt or believed. But the structure of the loss is clear. They could remember the missing children as brothers and sisters, preserve family stories, and live with the consequences of the fire. They could never ask those 5 what happened after the night began, or compare their memories with first-hand answers. George became a father investigating the gap between what the fire destroyed and what it failed to reveal. He kept pressing for answers, brought the family's claim into public view, and used a billboard to display the missing children's faces. That decision transformed a private family tragedy into a continuing public search, linking the children's identities to the unanswered case. That effort was more than a search for a location. It was an attempt to force the wider community to notice the unanswered gap left by the fire. The billboard could carry the children's names and faces beyond Fayetteville, reaching travelers and strangers who might recognize them. The fire had taken the house, but it had not supplied a confirmed place where the children went. Searching for children who may already be gone carries a terrible risk. George and Jenny could be judged as parents who could not let go, especially as years passed without proof of survival. Yet letting go might have meant abandoning children who were still alive, living somewhere beyond the family's knowledge. Every search therefore carried emotional consequences as well as the possibility of finding evidence. Their struggle was not simply about choosing hope over grief. It was about the fear of making the wrong choice about someone they loved. Declaring the children dead without remains could bury a living child in the public record. Continuing to search could prolong a grief that had no confirmed ending. Either decision carried a possible betrayal, and neither could guarantee the truth. The billboard could spread the children's faces far beyond the family home. It could invite recognition from someone who believed they had seen one of them after December 24, 1945, and it could keep the names in public memory when official answers remained incomplete. Each face represented a missing person, but also a question about whether the fire had truly accounted for all 5. But the billboard could not restore the missing years. It could not test the ashes, prove what happened inside the fire, or identify a confirmed place where the children went. It could not distinguish a genuine sighting from mistaken recognition or rumor. It could ask the question in public, year after year, but it could not answer what the evidence had never conclusively established. Hope itself began to hurt. Each new day offered the possibility that the 5 children had survived the Christmas Eve fire in 1945. Yet each day without proof made that hope harder to carry. For George and Jenny Sodder, time did not bring the ordinary certainty that follows a death. It extended the waiting, leaving every morning open to possibility and every evening without news painfully unfinished. Any reported sighting, rumor, or possible clue remained unconfirmed unless reliable evidence supported it. A name remembered by a stranger, a vehicle noticed near Fayetteville, or a story repeated years later could suggest a direction, but none established what happened. For George and Jenny, hope meant imagining a reunion, then facing the pain of losing that reunion again whenever the supposed lead failed. The surviving record gives us several firm facts. The fire happened in Fayetteville, West Virginia, on Christmas Eve in 1945. 4 children escaped the burning home, 5 children were missing afterward, and no confirmed bodies were found. George and Jenny continued searching for those 5 children for the rest of their lives, preserving the case through inquiries, public appeals, and a determination that never received a conclusive answer. Other claims belong to suspicion, memory, or later retelling. A careful account must keep those claims separate from what can be established, because uncertainty is part of the case, not a gap to be filled with invention. The absence of confirmed remains is a documented problem, while stories about sightings, abduction, or later identities require separate evidence that the surviving record does not conclusively provide. People still feel the Sodder parents' pain because the fear is easy to understand. A parent can look at a photograph of a child and wonder whether that child is safe, even when every official answer says the search should end. George and Jenny were forced to confront that impossible conflict. Grief demanded acceptance, while the missing evidence continued to leave room for doubt. The mystery remains powerful because the family was left between two unbearable possibilities. The children might have died in the fire, or they might have lived beyond it, somewhere their parents could not reach. The first possibility required accepting a catastrophe without confirmed remains. The second required believing that 5 children had been removed or carried away during the confusion of the disaster. The evidence chain is simple. The house burned in Fayetteville on December 24, 1945. 4 children escaped, 5 vanished from the family's immediate reach, and no confirmed bodies were found. George and Jenny believed kidnapping was possible, and that belief shaped the public campaign that followed. They continued searching for the rest of their lives, rather than treating the disappearance as settled. That chain does not solve the case. It explains why the mystery endured. Every known fact leads to another unanswered question, and no final piece closes the gap. If the fire killed the children, investigators still had to account for the absence of confirmed remains. If the children survived, the record still lacked a verified route, destination, or later identity. The house had been a place of shelter before the fire, containing the family's routines, possessions, and sleeping children. Afterward, it became the last known place where the 5 missing children were accounted for. That location connected ordinary family life to a sudden emergency, and then to a disappearance whose meaning remained disputed for decades. Nothing about that last known place could tell George and Jenny what happened next. The family's certainty ended at the burning home, while the questions continued beyond its walls and beyond the ruined property. The children were last associated with the house, but the surviving evidence did not establish whether they remained inside, escaped unseen, or were taken elsewhere. The fire explanation must account for the missing bodies. A structure consumed by flames can destroy evidence, but that general possibility does not by itself prove what happened in this particular case. The kidnapping explanation must account for how 5 children disappeared during the disaster, how they could have been moved, and where they went afterward without a confirmed trace. Neither explanation has been proven in full. One leaves a physical question unanswered. Where were the identifiable remains or other conclusive evidence? The other leaves questions of action, movement, and destination unanswered. Who could have taken the children? How was it done? And what became of them? Each theory addresses part of the mystery while leaving another part exposed. George and Jenny carried that unfinished question through changing years. The disappearance did not remain locked in 1945. It stayed part of the family's history as time passed. Investigations, rumors, newspaper attention, and public appeals could reopen the uncertainty, but none produced a confirmed account. The case moved forward through the decades without the one fact the family needed most. The years could alter the world around them, but they could not provide a confirmed answer. The family had to live with a loss that had no clear ending and no certain place of burial. There was no verified final scene, no established destination, and no accepted explanation that could transform uncertainty into ordinary mourning. Time added distance, but not resolution. The billboard changed the disappearance from a private family tragedy into a public case. It gave the 5 children a presence beyond the home and asked strangers to remember that they were still missing. Their names and faces became part of a continuing appeal, connecting the family's unanswered loss to motorists, newspapers, investigators, and anyone who might recognize a clue years after the fire. Public memory can preserve a question, but it cannot turn suspicion into proof. People may keep the case alive for generations while still admitting that the final truth is unknown. Repeated stories can make a theory feel familiar, and familiar claims can begin to sound established. But repetition does not create records, physical evidence, or a verified chain connecting the missing children to any later place. The greatest danger is loving a theory more than the family at its center. The kidnapping theory matters because it shaped George and Jenny's lives, not because it offers the most exciting plot. It expressed their refusal to accept an explanation they believed was incomplete, and it guided their search. But the emotional force of that belief cannot substitute for evidence proving who took the children or what happened afterward. The 5 missing children were real human beings, and the 4 who survived were left with the same family wound. George and Jenny were not chasing a story. They were trying to understand what had happened to their children. That distinction matters. The case endures not because uncertainty is entertaining, but because a family faced a fire, a disappearance, and a lifetime without the confirmed answer that could finally explain either. A careful account must begin with what is known, then mark the boundary between fact and belief. The 1945 Fayetteville fire destroyed the Sodder home. 5 children disappeared, and no confirmed remains were recovered from the ruins. It should say the parents believed their children were kidnapped, not state that kidnapping was proven, and it should never claim to know what happened inside the ashes. The honest conclusion is that the case remains unresolved. No court ruling, laboratory finding, recovered body, or later identification has established a final explanation. That wording may feel incomplete, especially after decades of newspaper coverage and family searching, but it protects the truth from being replaced by a theory that the surviving evidence cannot securely support. For George and Jenny Sodder, the mystery was not a puzzle they could set aside after investigators left Fayetteville. A confirmed loss can become a scar with a known boundary, but an unknown loss keeps being touched by every new question, every reported sighting, and every suggestion that one of the missing children might have survived. Their lives held grief and possibility at the same time. They mourned 5 children after the Christmas season fire, yet they also feared that mourning them as dead might mean giving up on children who could still be alive. That conflict made ordinary closure impossible, because accepting one explanation seemed to risk abandoning another. The investigation can be understood through 3 separate layers. Evidence includes the 1945 Fayetteville fire, the children who survived, the destroyed structure, and the absence of bodies from the burned home. Those are the physical and documented elements of the case, even when their meaning remains disputed by investigators, relatives, and later researchers. Belief formed another layer. George and Jenny became convinced that kidnapping may have occurred, based on details surrounding the fire and on what they felt the official account failed to explain. Memory formed a third layer, carried through the billboard, newspaper reports, family recollections, and stories passed from one generation to another, where details could be preserved, emphasized, or changed. The word 5 can sound cold when placed in a case summary. It can appear beside a date, a location, and a list of unanswered questions, as if it were only a measurement. But 5 was not just a number in that house. It represented the scale of the family's loss, and the reason the mystery remained personal. Each missing child represented a separate bond, a separate voice, and a separate place within the family. Without inventing names or personalities, the basic truth remains clear. The mystery concerns 5 children, not one event reduced to a statistic. Their disappearance altered the lives of surviving relatives and shaped the family's public search for decades. The missing bodies are not a minor detail added for drama. Their absence was central to the parents' doubts because the fire's destruction did not produce confirmed remains that could identify the children or establish a specific cause of death. That absence remains central to people who study the case today, even when they disagree about its meaning. At the same time, missing bodies alone cannot establish what happened. They can challenge an official conclusion, expose uncertainty in an investigation, or leave room for alternative possibilities, but they cannot prove that another explanation is true. The difference matters because an unanswered question is evidence of uncertainty, not automatic evidence of kidnapping, survival, or any other theory. George and Jenny faced a painful choice after the Fayetteville fire. They could allow the family to retreat into private sorrow, accept the limits of the official account, and stop drawing attention to the loss. Or they could keep acting in the hope that public attention, a tip, or a remembered detail might reveal something the destroyed home had hidden. The billboard became evidence of that choice. By placing their children's photographs before strangers, the parents exposed their grief to the public because private mourning could not answer what had happened. The display transformed a family tragedy into a continuing appeal, asking travelers, newspaper readers, and anyone with information to recognize the children and report a possible lead. A lifelong search demands more than courage in a single moment. It requires attention, emotional energy, money, organization, and the strength to face the same unanswered question again. For the Sodder family, each passing year added distance from the 1945 fire. while the original uncertainty remained fixed, refusing to become either confirmed death or confirmed survival. The parents had to carry photographs, explain the disappearance, respond to new reports, and live with the possibility that every lead might end in disappointment. A letter, a sighting, or a claim from a distant place could reopen hope without producing proof. The search was not a heroic montage. It was a continuing cost paid through years of uncertainty. Personal conviction and public proof are not the same. George and Jenny became certain that their children had been stolen, yet the case never produced final proof that could settle the matter for everyone. Their certainty reflected how they interpreted the fire, the missing bodies, and the surrounding circumstances, but interpretation cannot substitute for evidence that survives scrutiny. That gap created a particular kind of loneliness. The parents had to live with what they believed, while knowing that investigators, journalists, relatives, and later researchers could still demand evidence they were never able to provide. Their strongest conviction could preserve the search, but it could not by itself supply a verified location, a recovered identity, or a documented chain of events. Unresolved cases travel through time because the missing remain unaccounted for. The fire is fixed in 1945, but each later generation inherits the same evidence and the same limits. Researchers can revisit newspaper archives, family statements, and investigative records, yet revisiting the record does not automatically create the physical proof that disappeared with the burned home. The mystery survives not because every theory is convincing, but because 5 children vanished from the record of their family, and no answer has ever fully returned them. The lasting question is therefore narrower and more demanding than any dramatic claim. What happened after the fire, and what evidence, if any, could finally establish it? Disappearance is not a softer word for death. It is a different condition, one that forces a family to live without knowing whether to mourn or to wait. For the loved ones of the 5 Sodder children, that uncertainty began after the Christmas Eve fire, and became part of every morning, every investigation, and every year that followed. For George and Jenny Sodder, grief could not settle into one clear form. 5 children were absent, but absence offered no grave, no recovered remains, no final sighting, and no fact strong enough to tell their parents what had truly happened. Their loss had no confirmed ending, only an empty space where certainty should have been. The investigation cannot honestly create an ending that the evidence does not provide. No supplied record identifies the children's final location, proves that they survived the fire, or proves that they died inside it. Those are separate claims, and none can be treated as established simply because one explanation feels more satisfying than another. That limit matters because the mystery depends on what remains unknown. The purpose is not to invent a conclusion for the Sodder family, but to understand how the uncertainty formed, why it endured after the burned house was gone, and why unanswered questions remained stronger than any simple explanation of 5 missing children. George and Jenny's hope showed remarkable strength under conditions that normally destroy hope. They continued searching when silence, time, and public doubt could have forced them to stop. Their efforts kept attention on the missing children long after the fire had ended, preserving the possibility that some overlooked fact might still connect the family to an answer. Yet the same hope prolonged their suffering. As long as rescue remained possible, they could not fully accept loss. Each new day carried the promise that a witness might come forward, a child might be located, or a forgotten detail might clarify the night. Instead, the years passed without the answer they were waiting to receive. The known setting is Fayetteville, West Virginia, on Christmas Eve in 1945. The Sodder house burned during the night, 4 children escaped, and 5 children vanished from the family's account of what followed. No bodies were found, and that absence became central to every later argument about what the fire could and could not explain. From those facts, George and Jenny drew a painful belief that their children may have been taken rather than killed in the fire. That belief shaped their search and their public appeals. But belief is not proof, and the case never produced the final evidence needed to establish abduction, survival, or death beyond reasonable dispute. The fire destroyed more than a house and the objects inside it. It destroyed the family's ability to know what had happened to 5 children. A physical structure could be reduced to debris, but the family's central question survived the flames. Had the children died in the building, or had they been removed before the fire claimed it? The burned building was visible and final. Its walls, rooms, and contents were gone, leaving destruction that could be recognized and described. The children's fate was invisible and open. That contrast trapped George and Jenny between mourning and expectation, unable to perform a complete burial in their minds because the evidence never supplied a confirmed death. A fire should leave destruction that can be examined. Ash, remains, structural damage, and a clear sequence of events should help explain who was lost and how. In Fayetteville, the expected chain of evidence did not resolve the disappearance. The house was destroyed, yet the fate of 5 children remained outside the certainty that physical evidence was supposed to provide. The Sodder case left 5 children without bodies while the house itself was gone. That mismatch became the engine of every later question. It allowed several explanations to survive at the same time: that the children died in the fire, that the remains were overlooked or destroyed, or that they had been taken. None of those explanations was conclusively proven. George and Jenny were searching for more than their children. They were searching for a clear truth: a body, a living child, a verified sighting, or one solid fact that could tell them how to grieve. Without that fact, every possibility remained attached to the family, and every possibility carried a different kind of pain. Their effort became a search for an ending that the fire had failed to provide. They sought records, witnesses, explanations, and any information that could close the gap between the Christmas Eve disaster and the years afterward. The house had been consumed, but the family's need for a final answer remained completely intact. The billboard transformed private uncertainty into a public demand for recognition. Its message and photographs insisted that the 5 children had not been erased from public memory simply because the fire had erased the house. Their names and faces remained connected to the unresolved case, carrying the family's question beyond Fayetteville and into the attention of strangers. It also left a question in the open for anyone passing by. If the children were still alive, someone, somewhere, might know where they were. The sign could preserve their identities and keep the possibility of discovery visible, but it could not reveal their fate. Public attention created pressure for answers without creating the evidence necessary to produce one. The question is painfully simple: how would a parent live without knowing whether a child was dead or waiting somewhere? George and Jenny carried that question beyond the night of December 24, 1945, through years that offered neither rescue nor certainty. Time did not transform the unknown into a confirmed loss. It only lengthened the period in which the family had to endure it. Their search shows the terrible weight of an unknown loss. Some wounds close around a confirmed truth, even when that truth is devastating. The Sodder family's wound remained open because the truth itself never arrived. Without remains, a verified survival, or a definitive explanation, the fire ended one night in Fayetteville, but did not end the family's search. The case remains unresolved because the 5 children were never found after the fire on Christmas morning, 1945. No bodies were recovered from the Sodder home, and no confirmed account established that the children had been taken. The flames explain how the Fayetteville house was destroyed, but they do not explain what happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. That gap is the center of the mystery. Without remains, investigators had no clear physical proof of death. Without a verified sighting after the fire, they had no clear proof of kidnapping. The case stopped between those 2 possibilities, while the surviving family had to live with an explanation that answered where the house went, but not where the children went. 1945 may feel distant, but a missing child is not an old feeling. The distance between that Christmas night in Fayetteville, West Virginia, and the present cannot erase the fear of parents waiting for an ambulance, a telephone call, a recovered body, or any fact strong enough to end uncertainty. Time passed, but the central absence remained. The 5 Sodder children remain emotionally present because their parents faced a question families still understand immediately. If proof is missing, grief cannot fully settle into mourning. Hope can become painful when each year brings no answer, yet abandoning it can feel impossible when the evidence never establishes that the children died inside the burned home. Uncertainty was not an empty space in this case. It became the force that kept the story alive. shaping George and Jenny Sodder's belief that the children might have been removed before the flames consumed the structure. Every unexplained detail, from the damaged telephone line to the missing fire truck, acquired importance because certainty had never arrived. That uncertainty gave the billboard a purpose beyond public notice. The photographs, names, and promised reward turned private doubt into a public demand that the children still be recognized. For years, the sign near the family property kept one possibility open: that someone might identify the children, remember seeing them, or provide information that the fire investigation had failed to produce. The mystery also survived because the fire settled only part of the story. It demonstrated that the wooden house had been destroyed during the early hours of December 25th, but it could not demonstrate with certainty whether all 5 children had died inside. The absence of recovered remains left the physical conclusion incomplete, even after the ruins had been cleared. That distinction carried forward through every retelling. Each new question returned to the same boundary between evidence and inference: what the fire proved and what it left untouched. It proved destruction, but not identity. It proved loss of the house, but not the final location of the children. That narrow boundary kept speculation attached to a documented tragedy. The long-term result was a public memorial made from a missing person appeal. The billboard kept the children's names and faces in view long after the ashes had cooled and the property had changed. It also preserved the family's position that the investigation had not answered the most important question, making the sign part memorial, part warning, and part continuing search. In that sense, the landscape around the old home carried 2 histories at once. It held the memory of a burned house on Fayetteville's Route 16, associated with Christmas 1945. It also held the absence of 5 children who were never brought home, never given a confirmed burial, and never removed from the family's daily memory by a definitive finding. For the surviving Sodder family, the consequence was personal and lasting. The children who remained grew up with their missing siblings still present in family memory, not through new evidence, but through an unanswered question repeated across holidays, anniversaries, newspaper inquiries, and conversations with investigators. The disappearance became part of family identity rather than a closed chapter. That question shaped the family's life without offering a final event to mark its end. There was no confirmed recovery, no known burial, and no accepted account that could close the wound. A funeral could not establish the facts, and an official conclusion could not replace physical evidence. The family was left with remembrance but denied resolution. The wider aftershock reached beyond the Sodder home. In Fayetteville, West Virginia, the 1945 Christmas fire became a record of how an official explanation could exist beside public doubt. Authorities could classify the event as a deadly house fire, while relatives and neighbors continued asking whether the children had ever been inside when the flames began. The family's actions helped change the way people remembered the case. Their searches, newspaper appeals, reward offers, and long-maintained billboard ensured that the story would not be preserved only as a house fire. It would also be remembered as the disappearance of 5 children whose final whereabouts were never established by a court, an autopsy, or a confirmed witness. Still, one question remains beyond the reach of the surviving record. Did the children die inside the fire, their remains destroyed or overlooked among the ruins? Or had they been taken before the flames erased the available evidence? Each possibility requires assumptions that the surviving documents and physical findings cannot fully prove, leaving the central question open. No later story has fully settled that question. The missing bodies, the damaged site, the uncertainty surrounding the fire's progression, and the absence of a confirmed witness leave the answer suspended between tragedy and disappearance. Later claims and reported sightings added movement to the story, but none produced evidence strong enough to identify the children or establish what happened that night. The lasting consequence is not a solved case, but a permanent demand for care when evidence is incomplete. The Fayetteville fire shows how quickly destruction can erase physical proof, while the need for truth survives in the people left behind. An official explanation may describe the event, yet it cannot automatically answer every question created by missing evidence, and that is why the mystery endures. The fire ended in one night, but the search for certainty continued across a lifetime, carried through family records, newspaper accounts, investigators' questions, and a public sign. 5 names remained at the center of it all. Children who vanished from the record without ever being allowed to disappear from memory. Long after the 1945 Fayetteville fire, the places connected to it carried a quiet burden. Families had to live with an absence that could not be marked by a confirmed grave, while neighbors carried memories that grew less certain with each passing year. For the people who kept searching, ordinary records became painful objects. A newspaper clipping, an old photograph, or a name written beside a date could reopen the same question: had the children died in the fire, or had they disappeared before it? The case also changed how the town understood its own history. A fire once treated as a local tragedy became a warning that missing people can vanish inside larger events, especially when records are incomplete and early investigations leave gaps. That change did not produce a final answer, but it altered the meaning of the evidence. Ashes suggested one possibility. Family belief suggested another. Public memory kept both alive, even when no later finding could prove either one. One question remains beyond what the surviving record can settle. Were the children inside the Fayetteville home when the fire began, or had they already been taken somewhere else? The question cannot be resolved by repeating the same clues. It depends on what was recorded in 1945, what was overlooked at the scene, and what later memories may have changed through grief, rumor, and time. The lasting consequence was not a solved case, but a permanent place in the town's memory. The fire became more than a damaged house or a single night. It became a record of how uncertainty can survive when official answers arrive too late. That uncertainty also changed the way later generations approached the story. They inherited not a complete account, but a chain of fragments that had to be handled carefully without turning belief into proof. For the families, history offered no clean distance. The children were not simply names from 1945. Their absence shaped holidays, family stories, and the lives of people who had to continue without knowing what had happened. For the wider community, the case became a measure of what can be lost when a disaster is investigated without enough evidence, enough time, or enough protection for the people left behind. Fayetteville remembered the fire, but it also remembered the unanswered space inside it. The surviving record can preserve dates, reports, photographs, and claims, yet it cannot restore the missing certainty. That is why the mystery endured. Not because every theory was equally strong, but because the central question was never fully closed. In the cold ash left by the 1945 Fayetteville fire, 5 children were still missing, and the destruction offered no clear answer about what had happened to them. The blaze had consumed the family's home so completely that investigators faced collapsed walls, burned timbers, and debris mixed with the remains of ordinary household objects. Searchers examined the ruins for human remains, personal effects, or any sign that the children had escaped before the fire spread. Yet no confirmed trace settled the question. Their names remained tied to the fire, while relatives were left with uncertainty instead of funerals, graves, or a documented final moment. In the years that followed, the case endured because the central evidence was absent. 5 children were believed to be inside, but the ashes never provided proof of where they went. Every small town has a story they'd rather forget. Subscribe to Buried in Plain Sight, Small Town Crimes we make sure they can't. New case every week. Hit the bell so you don't miss it.